Okay, right. So today's agenda, Patrick is going to have a look at some of the various political party proposals and what they might mean for the post-16 sector. Because as we're only a couple of days away from the election, we thought it might be interesting for everybody to get a feel for what might happen should a specific political party get into power on Thursday. Well, Friday, actually, we'll know, won't we? And then Eric is going to cover the defunding of T-levels and qualifications briefly, just to remind everybody what's happening from the 1st of August. He's also going to cover the adult skills and general update, and then there is apprenticeship update, which I will finalise at the end, and then we should have time for questions. So without further ado, everybody, I'm going to hand over to Patrick. Go ahead, Patrick, and just ask me when you want me to forward the slides.
Thank you, Bryony, and welcome everybody to this webinar and this update. Hopefully this is going to be of use to everybody, and all that I've done here really is I've taken the three main political parties, Labour, Conservative and Liberal Democrats, and just really tried to extract out from their manifestos anything which seems to give a reference to skills and education. For the purpose of weather update, I'm in London, and as you would imagine, it's Wimbledon week and it's raining, so there's no great surprise there. Remains to be seen, I guess, whether we're going to get any surprises on Thursday and Friday. Fair to say that I think even if you're not a gambling person, most people are looking at a potential change of administration at this general election, and therefore we'll start to sort of step through the manifestos now and just have a think about what these things might mean. Now, Labour proposals, I think it's interesting, Labour, that they've understandably, I think they've kept a fairly low profile during campaigning, and therefore they've been fairly consistent with some headline statements, but not chosen to get into any great detail at this stage, and they don't need to at this stage, and don't particularly want to expose themselves to that level of debate. So there is therefore, I think, an opportunity potentially on the 5th to start to engage with what might be a new administration to help flesh out some detail on some of these headline statements. But let's just step through what their areas are likely to focus on. The first, I guess, is the hint that there could be the reintroduction of a new industrial strategy and revisit the statutory Industry Strategy Council, and this effectively, I guess, is a resurrection of something that used to be in place, and to be fair, something which has been called for on several occasions over the last few years. I think many people have bemoaned the fact that we don't seem to have a central industrial strategy which is then driving national agenda and cascading out into regional application. So there's definitely a hint in which that might be revisited, and no doubt a link there into other aspects like Skills England. I'll come on to that in a moment. So Skills England, a headline title for an entity bringing together business, training providers, unions, national local government. Again, goes hand in hand, I guess, with that kind of industrial strategy, this sense in which businesses and employers and industry take some independent ownership of what a skills strategy should be, an industrial strategy should be for the UK. And again, we await detail about exactly how that will operate, what it might mean for the various quangos and organisations that exist out with the department. So more detail to follow there, but I think there's a sense in which, I think there's always a sense of deja vu with these things, isn't there? There's a sense in which, is it a nod back towards a kind of a UK CES environment and agenda? Maybe not quite as independent as that became, but certainly a sense in which there should be a national strategy that everybody can refer back to. I guess the other headline grabbing statement has been the ongoing hint that the apprenticeship levy might be reformed to become a growth and skills levy, with Skills England then consulting on eligible courses. So I think the key point here is that on the one hand, it looks like total flexibility. In reality, I don't think it ever will be. I think whenever state money is concerned, the Treasury and various other departments will want to keep a hand on exactly where that state money could be used. We've seen it with things like the advanced learner loans and other programs of that nature, where there's always been a kind of a degree of intervention as to what types of courses the money could be spent on, and I don't think that would change significantly even in this context. However, I think it could be quite an interesting intervention, partly because clearly there is, and not clearly, but I mean, not everybody understands that there is a distinct difference between the levy take and the apprenticeship budget as assigned by the department. The two things are not the same, and people often confuse them. So when we say underspent levy, we're talking about underspent levy, which is the levy take pot connected to employers, which is underspent. And then often that gets conflated with the apprenticeship budget, which is heading for overspend again, because of concurrent allocations and year-on-year cumulative impact of longer programmes. So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is, if that was to come in, what would that do for current apprenticeship take-up if it's going to see a displacement of some activity into other skills programmes? Too early to say, really, I would suggest, partly as well because actually not all companies make full utilisation of their levy opportunity, and therefore they don't make full utilisation of apprenticeship offer. Apprenticeship offer under the reforms is quite rightly linked into real jobs, and that will always curtail an organisation's ability to engage with it because it is about real jobs and headcount. It's been one of the reasons why I think we've seen a drift towards in workforce higher level apprenticeships, because if an organisation is going to fully utilise its apprenticeship purse, it can't do it by concentrating solely on young entry level recruits into the workforce. So it's one of the reasons why we've seen that skew. What it might mean is that where organisations can still use, and they'll still probably have to use a percentage of their levy for apprenticeships, where they have to do that, it may well see a bit of a skew back towards younger entry-level type jobs for apprenticeships. And what you might see is actually in workforce, older workers being put through much shorter, sharper, flexible skills programs, because that's a better fit than trying to fit them into an apprenticeship. So the overall impact might not be as disruptive as you could imagine, because it'll just mean a settling of activity across various organisations. Question mark, however, over what it might mean for SMEs, what it might mean for nations' devolved funding, because again, sometimes people don't understand that the total levy take actually also funds those things as well. So there's going to be some interesting debate, I think, once the detail starts to emerge about what it will mean for the overall pot, and where we will see displacement and what pickup will be from employers if they're given that flexibility, and whether there is still money in the pot to then transfer down into the SME community. But I do think that that is likely to go ahead, and that is likely to happen, so definitely one to watch. We're definitely going to see, I think, a continuation of devolution. We know that there's some additional MCA areas who are waiting for their applications to be approved. So I think we'll continue to see some of that expansion, which means increased flexibility and variance around the country in terms of how some of those pots of devolved money could be spent. It's a good thing in the sense of it becomes a very sensitive to local demand and need. It can be a bit tricky sometimes when you're trying to navigate your way through what the opportunity is, because it can then very much become related to postcode. And you have to try and work that out if you're trying to see what the skills opportunity is for individuals. But could also be a way in which local regions can respond to their particular economic profile. And we'll see that continuing. I think we'll also start to see a continuation into clusters of authorities that might not be an MCA as such, but do become sort of ring-fenced clusters of authorities that also get some sort of devolved allocation. Further education colleges into specialist technical excellence colleges. Again, we await detail of what that means. My one wish is that we don't see the perennial problem of incoming administrations deciding to have a demolish and rebuild strategy. We have to ask ourselves, well, what then for national colleges and institutes of technology? Are they going to be subsumed within this rebadging? Or are we just looking at a rebranding of colleges without necessarily looking at any new build or high levels of capital investment? Remains to be seen, but I think there's certainly that sense in which further education colleges and others will form this kind of backbone of technical education. I do think as well that we might yet see a little bit more displacement across HE and FE in that level 4 and 5 space, where the places in which that type of education takes place may start to differ. Definitely Labour is supportive of a youth guarantee and a commitment to 18 to 21-year-olds, really trying to reduce that risk of NEET across either training, apprenticeships or support to find work. I think we all know that if young people encounter that sort of NEET experience, it can be very difficult to get them out of that place. And at a time when, if we look at levels of employment and levels of recruitment, one of the things that's holding the UK back is actually the amount of people who are eligible for work but not in work. Any labour market debate, it's very difficult for it not to drift into a debate about migration, etc. as well. And so I think it's likely that there's going to be an overlap here with things like the Migration Advisory Committee as well, when we start to think about how we really turbocharge the UK population support to get them back into work and good work. There's been a nod towards new wealth funds supporting growth, clean energy, etc., carbon capture, hydrogen. I think there's definitely going to be an ongoing focus on clean energy. And obviously then that translates into particular focus, I would suggest, in electrical engineer type skills, electrical technician skills, because regardless of the means by which you generate the power, most of that power that's being generated is electricity. So I think we're also going to see that. I think we're going to see potentially rejuvenation in investment in coastal regions through offshore wind, etc. And so it will be important to try and track what that means for the working population in those various regions and whether they've got the skills that are required. There's been a nod towards possible reintroduction of traineeships or pre-apprenticeship models that might be tied into the growth and skills levy, might be tied into the youth guarantee, but again, maybe just trying to revisit again that pathway into apprenticeships where people are not ready to start an apprenticeship itself. And a hint that we might see potentially a pause of the reform and defunding of vocational qualifications. That's going to be covered later on in this webinar right now in terms of where we're at. But it's something that's been called for on several occasions. I think Labour have hinted that they might pause that work and just reflect on whether the intervention has been successful, whether it needs to be done in the way that it has been done. And finally, they also still make a nod towards revisiting lifelong loans, learning entitlements, etc. I guess my observation would be, I think we still haven't really got a cohesive lifelong learning strategy in the UK. It appears very patchwork, depending on whether you are adult ed, advanced learner loans, lifelong learning entitlement. It all tends to be a little bit too fragmented. We've often called for this idea that a lifelong learning entitlement should be all age, all level. And the only difference being whether or not you have a mix of state loan or private pay within that. So if that's Labour, let's think about Conservatives. At the moment, they're very much suggesting that they will continue with their vocational qualification reforms and very much that focus on streamlining qualification off, which they see as confusing. And that will really continue the path that we're on at the moment in terms of restricting choice in a range of qualifications, maintaining the apprenticeship levy in its current form, regardless of whether it's actually being fully utilised or not. So again, no real change there. The only thing that they have hinted at with apprenticeships was this announcement about the 100,000 apprenticeships by every year extra. This is additional apprenticeships funded by closing certain university courses. So very much that kind of hint towards a disruption of higher education in turn then to fund apprenticeship programs, etc. I mean, in many ways, it's a difficult one for a government to make an announcement about because no government can guarantee apprenticeships. The only people that can guarantee apprenticeships are employers, regardless of whether there's funding in the pot. If they don't have the apprenticeship offer, there is no apprenticeship. So it's not entirely clear how that would be enacted if it was to be put in place. And clearly, we don't really know exactly what range of higher education courses would be disrupted to support that. The other headline statement they made at the end of last party conference was the Advanced British Standard, which I think caught everybody a little bit out. Wouldn't be enacted for another 10 years at least. And not a new thing. I think many people have often spoken about now is the time to reform our national curriculum to bring that balance between vocational and academic education. It came at an odd time, I think, when it looked to disrupt a lot of things that they had already got in place. There are some other parties that hinted at a kind of an ongoing post-16 review, which, without being as precise as the ABS, might be a similar kind of approach to just reset some of that balance. There was a headline statement about 18-year-olds to engage in community work or military placements, national service. Again, possibly a way to restrict numbers of NEETs by just allocating them to different programs. Not entirely sure whether that would suitably solve some of the problems about transitioning to work, but again, it's a headline statement that was made. And extending the UK Shared Prosperity Fund for 3 years at the next spending review as well. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund being essentially what replaced the old European social fund, and has therefore been used at various times to provide regional investment in both infrastructure and skills. So a welcome thing in terms of what was going to replace it, but never been entirely clear what the longevity of the SPF was. And also from 2025, very much pushing ahead with their LLE loans concept, and albeit one which is very much constrained at certain levels and above. I think the danger with the LLE is currently envisaged by Conservative is that it may simply favour an additional top-up year for graduates rather than really getting the population back involved in lifelong learning and education, and expand their existing skills programs such as Multiply and skills boot camps. So no massive change across those things, with a hint of a couple of other bits and pieces that may or may not be enacted. So finally, with Liberal Democrats, and I think this is quite interesting with the Lib Dems, because I think that they will have quite a positive experience at the general election. Whether they have a positive enough experience to then influence a party that might win remains to be seen. But there's quite a high degree of overlap, actually, if you look at some of the Lib Dems' areas of focus, and certainly things that Labour have spoken about. They speak about this Standing Commission for Curriculum Qualifications to bring consensus, a sort of cross-party consensus, and broaden the curriculum. So not sort of a million miles from an ABS, but not a direct mention of ABS in there. The Young People's Premium, not a million miles away from a youth guarantee. And again, just generally improving the quality of vocational education. A number of parties have hinted at this idea of employability skills and underlying digital skills and entrepreneurship. It's something that many people have often said is missing from the educational system, but always struggles to find space. The reason why I think it probably would go back to some overarching reform programme. They wish to reform hospital inspections, which again has been something that many people have called for, and strengthen careers advice and links with employers. This may be a nod towards finally trying to address that kind of divide between CEC and the National Careers Service, where we don't really have an all-age careers advisory service. It's certainly not a service that supports people who are in work that might be looking to change career. So it tends to favour young people making their first choices and people who are unemployed and looking to get back into work. So they're talking about increasing school and college funding per pupil. I'm not entirely sure how that would be done, because I think the one thing which is true of any party that comes in on Friday is that no party is going to inherit a massive amount of cash. So I think anything where people talk about increases in funding, the first question I'll always be asking is, where is it coming from? It's likely to come from a displacement of other funding rather than a massive increase in taxes. Their idea of a lifelong skills grant is much more all age, all level. And again, probably a chance to revisit. It's interesting when you look at things like the individual learning accounts, and people often get very anxious about them, about why they failed. Things fail at a moment in time, and it may well be that now, with better tracking, better technology, is a time to reintroduce concepts like that, because they might be better governed than they were previously. And turning the apprenticeship into a flexible skills and training levy is much the same as the skills and growth levy concept. National colleges as national centres of expertise, but they reference national colleges rather than calling it something new. And I think that would be an extension or expansion of some of the footprint that already exists, which is quite a sensible thing to do. And then obviously solving skills gaps. And again, what they're pitching at here is that kind of missing middle. UK generally fares quite well in terms of HE achievement and graduates on an international level. Doesn't fare too badly at some of the lower levels, but the problem is we tend to get stuck there, where we tend to underperform is in some of that mid-level application, levels 4, 5, etc. And often it's because we don't really have provision for it. And I think that's the thing that Lib Dems are trying to hint at here, to actually create more space and focus for that area of skills education. Inevitably, I think that would probably mean a displacement from degree education, which again is something that various parties have hinted at that might need to happen anyway. So a high degree of overlap there, I think, between some of the Labour policies remains to be seen whether that might be brought to bear on Friday if it's needed. And so I think it's all, there's a consistency there about education and skills in terms of some areas of focus. And I think there's some great opportunity come Friday to really turn that into quite effective action. We're going to need effective action because I don't think there's suddenly going to be lots more money in the system. So what we're going to have to do is become far better at using what investment we've got. And that might mean an aggregation of investments. It might mean a better focus with areas, but we can't afford to waste any pound that we spend from July onwards, and that will be, I think, an important feature of a new administration and what they do in the first 100 days and beyond that. So hopefully that's helpful in terms of a high-level overview of what we're seeing from the three main parties, and we'll be able to then respond and take that forward once the election's over, and work with whichever government it is to turn some of these things into reality. Thank you.
Paddy, that's great. Thank you. Quick question from me, because I know you've got to dive off after this, I think, haven't you? I thought so, yeah. So I'm going to ask a quick question. We've had various governments talk about managing the higher education offer more effectively, because we know that because of various policy changes over a series of years, and that's not just this government, it's previous government, if we're looking at it fairly and squarely, that we've had a proliferation of, in some cases, not particularly great quality courses, which have ended up in not great quality degrees for some graduates, which have ended up in ending up in an apprenticeship at a later date at a lower level to get themselves into work, or further training in work, or even ending up in a job that, you know, is not certainly at a graduate level. And I think there was a statistic that was discovered by, I think it was the ONS a few years back. They were saying about 37% of graduates end up in a lower level of job than a graduate should, which is an astounding amount of money that we've spent, and those young people have spent, to end up in a job which either isn't going to enable them to pay back their loan, or in a job which is not really giving them the opportunity to move forward. So we know it's not a great position, but successive governments have spoken about this, but they haven't actually done anything. Do you really think, across the three parties, with the conversations you've had with various, officials and potentially with some of the shadow cabinet and various others, that there is real appetite to actually do this, considering how independent the HE sector is?
Okay, so I think fundamentally the question is, do we think any government would be brave enough to address some significant disruption of the higher education system? I think the reality, I think, is that I don't think anybody would argue that, and let's be honest, it was a Labour policy, wasn't it, initially? It was a Blair policy. Yeah. Education, that more and more people should have the ability to go to university. And I think a Labour mantra has always been the opportunity for working class parents to have middle class children, and higher education was seen as a kind of a proxy for that ambition. The reality is that there are simply not enough graduate level jobs in the UK ecosystem to support the amount of graduates that are coming out of the system, and there never was, and there was never going to be. However much we have an ambition to become a knowledge economy, I don't think our economy is that profile and ever will be entirely. So I think it's more likely that what an incoming government would do would be to create some very obvious space for level 4 and level 5 application, which by definition might lead to a displacement of learners into that space. Because when we talk about low quality higher education courses, I think that's slightly unfair, because I don't think necessarily the courses themselves are low quality, because I don't think universities would necessarily do that. I think what they are is poorly focused as to what the potential destination is from the courses. So if the courses aren't strongly focused into some labour migration than they are simply to get a degree badge on something, and that isn't always good enough to secure higher level employment. And I think it's also therefore, from a social mobility point of view, I don't think it's fair for us to be saddling so many young people with a debt that is unlikely to be repaid quickly, because they're not going to land the jobs that are going to allow them to repay it quickly. The ones that can repay it and pay it off straight away probably don't need any sort of social mobility support anyway. And therefore, I think we have a duty for young people. We have a duty to the nation, because unpaid loans simply become debt. So it might as well just be HE paying for the state paying for HE education anyway. So I think there's lots of reasons why it needs to be looked at. There's lots of reasons why it will be resisted. But I think if we create a decent level 4 and 5 opportunity, there is an opportunity there for HE to step down into that space and to cater for it, as well as what might be a slightly more streamlined degree offer, which is better aligned with either academic research or the sorts of professions that typically would expect degree level graduates to enter their occupation.
And we know from the local skills improvement plan analysis that Eric and I carried out that so many employers are screaming out for those technical skills at levels 3, 4 and 5. And actually that's where a lot of the need is. But we still have that cultural issue of many, many parents wanting their kids to go to university. And that's going to be the really difficult one. I think that's where your point about really good CIAG comes in, both for, I think, for adults and for young people as well.
No, totally. And I think the reality is that inevitably, regardless of how good your careers information advice and guidance is, everybody needs a track record, don't they? People need a track record and an evidence base to say that actually those level 4 and level 5 courses lead to really good, sustainable, meaningful work on a good salary. And until we start to get that evidence base emerge, I think you'll always get that rather polarised view with parents, where every parent wants the best for their children, don't get me wrong, but it becomes a very binary view about either they're getting to university or, you know, they're destined for low paid work, which is simply not true. And therefore we need to do a lot more to dial up awareness about what good technical and vocational education can offer people.
Yeah, we need to do it with parents as much as we need to do it with young people. Yeah.
Yes, we do. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Patrick, for joining us today and for giving us that overview. That's really great. Hopefully everyone found that really useful. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you. And if there's any other questions, obviously we can loop back round and try and come back out with answers to things as well. And, you know, let's be honest, we all await the answers on Thursday and Friday, don't we? When we know
an exciting night.
So
we're going to have champagne out on a Friday morning, or for commiserations or celebrations. We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Thanks, as well.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye now.
Bye. Okay, everybody. So I'm now going to hand over to Eric, and Eric is going to cover what's happening with defunding, well, potentially what's happening with defunding of some qualifications. It could well be that the Labour government comes in, on Friday, and as Paddy mentioned, the possibility that they might actually pause the defunding, and that could happen to those qualifications that were due to be defunded on the 31st of July. That's one, again, to wait and see. We won't know that probably for a couple of weeks, but that is also a possibility. But we're going to flag it just in case. So I'm now going to hand over to Eric. Eric, over to you. Let me know when you want the slides moving forward.
Correct, and thanks very much, Bryony. I've already got a table booked for Friday evening after the election. Yes, so to get started, so we're just going to go through some of the funding policy. At the minute, we're pretty much only focusing on T levels because that's the most pressing defunding at the moment. But just to recap, this is kind of how defunding works, and this is how the current government have seen their defunding model and how they've introduced it. So generally, defunding is intended to coincide with introduction of new T levels and reform qualifications. The idea being that effectively there's never a lack of provision. As new things come in, other things leave, and you've just got new provision. And that's generally the theory behind it. As an example, there's going to be a new suite of level 3 reformed cores and digital from August 25. And as these new cores are introduced, existing overlapping courses will lose funding from August 2025 as well. And again, the intention behind it really is to provide a smaller, higher quality offer, which is easier for providers to manage and for employers and learners to choose from. So that's kind of the theory behind the funding. The idea is that they're just replacing older calls for newer ones, and that there is always provision available. Now, the most pressing defunding that we have at the minute is the T-level overlap. So quals overlapping with T-levels are to lose 16 to 18 funding. And you can see below is the list of kind of subject sector areas which are due to lose some defunding as a result of overlapping with T-levels. And you see that wave 4, the defunding list is still provisional at the time being. What we're focusing on right now is waves 1 and 2. So as you can see, the defunding date is August 2024. I believe the last date for new starts is the 31st of July 24. So as you can tell, that's very, very pressing. It's the end of the month when qualifications overlapping with the wave 1 and wave 2 SSEs are being defunded. Much of the reason I've included this is so you're very aware that this is happening, and it's happening very, very soon. And you can see the SSEs for it as well. It's construction, the built environment, digital, education and childcare, and health and science. But it's also to make you aware that, as Bryony said, depending on what happens on Thursday night, Friday morning, this might change. Bridget Phillipson has noted that she may pause and begin to re-evaluate the reforms. So there is still a chance that this wave 1 and 2 T-level overlap might be paused, or if the DfE haven't got the time to pause it, they might try and bring back the funding before we have people starting again in September, for instance. So there is a possibility of that happening before we have the new academic year, but it really, really depends on what our new Secretary of State, if we have one, does when they come in. So it's going to be very much an ears to the ground situation to see kind of how that happens and what happens. Excellent. So you can see here we still have some T-levels available for delivery. This is just to quickly revisit them. So you can see on the left-hand side are the T-levels that have already been released. I'm going to give you a second just to look through them. Some of our newer T-levels being released from academic year 24-25 are in craft and design, media broadcast and production, and animal care and management, with marketing coming in 25-26. and a planned T-level in catering. So that is the current picture. You can see it's quite a big, wide spanning area for T-levels. And yes, thank you very much. And with that, the T-level funding bands have been updated for the 24-25 academic year. You can see that the government have maintained the 10% T-level uplift, which has been introduced last year, which effectively means slightly more funding for T-level learners. And we are seeing as well that all T-levels being introduced in 24-25 are on funding band 7, except for the animal care and science T-level OS, which is on funding band 8. The T-levels released in 24-25 are media broadcast production, craft and design, and animal care and management. And you can see on the funding bands here that generally we have quite modest increases of around £200 to £270, which should help a little bit for anyone delivering at T-levels. And that's kind of how the rates are looking right now. And that is ultimately the rates, but they don't include disadvantage and area funding, for instance. So it will be slightly different once you get the funding. And we'll move forward into the adult skills and a general update. This is one for the teachers. So if you're a teacher, do perk up a little bit. FE teachers can claim a levelling up payment for £2,000 to £6,000 for teaching specific courses in the following subject areas: building and construction, chemistry, computing, early years, engineering and manufacturing, maths, and physics. And now with this, that fund does actually go to the teachers as well. It's kind of used to help retain teachers in these areas, which are generally areas where we're kind of struggling to keep teachers or to recruit teachers. That's the idea behind the payment, and it does go directly to the teachers. So if you have teachers in these areas, it's important to kind of note to them that they could potentially have this extra money available to them. There are some credentials that you need to follow to be eligible to claim. You need to be in your first 5 years of your FE teaching career. You need to spend half of your hours teaching eligible FE courses, a level 3 or below. You need to teach more than 2.5 hours a week. Spend at least half your time teaching 16 to 19-year-olds up to 25 with EHCP. Not be under disciplinary action or formal performance measures. have a teaching qual or working towards a teaching qual or intend to enroll a teaching qual in the next 12 months. And you need to be working at an FE provider. Now with this, there is a list available of all the providers and all the courses which are eligible for these payments. I do want to note that most of the providers are colleges. I think there are a couple of ITPs on there, but for the most part, it is colleges who are eligible for this. The list of providers is available online, so if you are working at a provider and you are filling this criteria, it's definitely worth having a look to see if your college is included and if the courses you deliver are also included. Now the funding, oh sorry Bryony, we're still back on that one. The funding between 6,000, 2,000, 6,000 depends on kind of the provider, percentage of learners receiving disadvantaged funding, and your teaching hours. And there's a big spreadsheet which shows you exactly how much you're eligible for, and it does all come in a lump sum to you. But do have a look for the 24-25 year applications open in autumn 24, but you must claim by 31st of March 2025, so it's worth looking at it quite quickly. That's it. Thank you, Bryony. Now the earning threshold, we went through this in our last webinar, but there have been some updates, so I thought I'd go through this one again. So ultimately, the earning threshold has replaced the unemployed on a low wage criteria, which was £20,319. The new earning threshold is now £25,000, which is a bit of an increase, which will hopefully help some more learners come into this funding. The DfE have also now confirmed that the £25,000 is gross salary, and the benefits should not be taken into account when using this criteria. It's also been confirmed that those earning under £25,000 may be funded regardless of unemployment status. So prior, when this was released, it was just you funded if you meet the earning threshold and they omitted being unemployed. They have now included unemployed on this. So now it's, if you want to be funded for certain models, it's either meeting the earning threshold or being unemployed. And we are going to go through some of the offers where you are funded if you meet the earning threshold in a moment, but we're still on this one for now. So providers must see evidence of the learner's gross wage or complete the benefit status indicator to determine if the learner is in receipt of benefits. But one of the big changes we're seeing now is that providers can use their discretion to fully fund learners who are unemployed and who are not receiving benefits, as long as they want to be employed and you're satisfied the learning is directly relevant to their employment prospects and their local and market needs. So that's been a little bit of a change, which will hopefully open things up a little bit to allow more people to undertake training. Thank you very much. So with this, sorry to say, the earning threshold is up to £25,000, and these are the courses where it's used as a criteria to actually get the funding. So you can see there's a list of courses there. So going forward, if you meet the earning threshold, so if you are earning £25,000 or under, or if you are unemployed, you are entitled to the following funding methodology. That's level 2 local flex, free course for jobs, ESOL, and tailored provision, which is effectively non-accredited provision at a training provider, mostly colleges. You can also do a work placement as long as you tie it to another form of training, such as a level 2 qualification, for instance. Swap, again, it's the same eligibility criteria, but you're still in through the job centres. You still go through job centres for that. It's the same with the Princess Trust. Now, I say prior attainment impacts it a little bit differently. So if you have a level 2 in bricklaying already, for instance, you still can't do another level 2 in bricklaying because you currently have the funding. But now it impacts the funding in a different way. So for example, if you were over 24 and you didn't have a level 3, you would previously have been eligible for a free course for jobs offer, regardless of your earning threshold. That is no longer the case. Now, the only way to be funded for these offers is if you meet the earnings threshold. So if you earn below £25,000, or if you are unemployed, that's the criteria, and they've simplified it to make it just that. But of course, that leaves a few gaps for people earning over that amount who don't have current qualifications. That's it for that slide. Oh, I think I chewed them, Bryony.
Oh, Right, that's me. Okay, so I'm just going to go over some of the apprenticeship funding rules updates. We've got some additional updates in here, both for the new apprenticeship funding rules from the 1st of August, but also there's been a version 4 of the 23-24 funding rules. So we're just going to pick up on some of the bits and pieces that have popped in there as well. So Maths and English in apprenticeships. Now, this is actually a really great change. I think the apprenticeship team at the ESFA worked really hard looking at how to simplify and make some aspects of both claiming for apprenticeship funding, but also access to apprenticeships and achievement in apprenticeships. They've taken a really close look from the research they did during 2021 and 2022, and the feedback that they got from providers about, barriers to both achievement, barriers to new entry, and barriers for employers as well. And they've really taken a good look at that and made some good changes to both the current rules, but also to the rules from the 1st of August. So these are exceptions on the Maths and English front, the changes. It must be evident. So myself and the team from RSM UK, the ESFA audit, one of the ESFA audit organisations, did a session on evidence and assurance for SEND and LLDD and additional learning support just over a week ago. We had a lot of people on that workshop. It was only an hour and a quarter long, and we overran. So myself and Lisa and Carl from RSM UK have decided we're actually going to do an Ask the Auditor panel early on in the autumn. So early on in the new term next academic year, myself, Carl and Lisa will do an Ask the Auditor panel for everybody. So watch out on LinkedIn for that, or sign up for the City and Guilds email updates, which you can find at the bottom of our website. There's a load of links. If you sign up for email updates and put in funding, I send out flyers to the funding contact list for anybody who's interested in attending any of our website workshops or webinars, and you'll get flyers about that. It's the only thing we really send out. We don't send loads of spam. So if you sign up for emailed updates for funding only, that's that's all that you'll get. So anyway, going on to these exceptions in Maths and English in apprenticeships, it's no longer necessary if your learner has additional learning support needs, SEND needs, LLDD needs, or you've identified a learner that's got these needs. You need to consider whether it's actually feasible for them to achieve the level 2 in English and Maths. If you think they are unlikely to achieve them because of those additional learning support needs, or because they've got SEND or LLDD requirements, or they've got an education, health and care plan from their local authority, you can then consider whether you can make an adjustment to the functional skills offer. And you could offer the entry level 3 instead as the adjusted subject. So they've still got to take some Maths and English qualifications, but it doesn't necessarily need to be the 1 and 2 for them to achieve their apprenticeship. Now, in addition to that, because providers noted that in some cases, they do have learners who start an apprenticeship and who mask those additional learning needs, and who mask, neurodivergence that actually might preclude them moving forward, or who mask additional learning needs. So it's now possible to carry out an additional learning support assessment later in the apprenticeship. It used to be that you had to carry it out at the beginning, and if you didn't have that assessment and 6 months down the line you recognise you've got a learner who's got some real challenges and is not progressing at the speed that you would expect, and the speed that potentially maybe other apprentices are progressing, you can now carry out an assessment, an initial assessment, and if it becomes evident that they have got an additional learning, you could then carry out the full diagnostic assessment to assess whether you think they've got an additional learning need, and if they have, you could at that time decide actually they're never going to get through their English and Maths level 2, so we can actually adjust that down to the entry level 3 if they don't already have qualifications. But also, in addition to this, the equivalent grading rules for Maths and English have been updated. So just to clarify those, if your new apprentice has a GCSE grade D to G or 3 to 1, they are now saying, ESFA and DFA are now saying that that is equivalent to a level 1 qualification in Maths and or English, and the apprentices that hold those grades have met the requirement to hold a level 1, so they wouldn't need to take a level 1 if they've got those grades. So just to be clear, those changes apply to both new starts from the 1st of August 2024 and apprentices that are currently on programme. So if you've got an apprentice that's on programme and you recognise they've got additional learning needs, or actually they've already got the grades D to G and you've got them on those maths and it's a struggle to get them through, you can now make decisions on those current learners about their maths and English needs, and also their SEND and additional learning support needs. So that's a real bonus. And in addition to that, on that learning support front that I mentioned a moment ago, as I said, support and progress reviews, they've made some changes to additional learning support. So the detailed assessment to establish learning support, it has to take place, but it can now be carried out also by a professional SEND LLD member. Now, it used to be, these are new learning support requirements from the 1st of August, guys. This doesn't apply unfortunately, to current apprentices. So the detailed assessment used to have to be taken place by a level 8 qualified SEND or LLDD member of staff. That's always been a massive blocker for providers, because actually level 8 SEND LLDD professionals cost an awful lot of money to recruit. They're actually quite expensive. ESFA are now saying that from 1st of August, a professional SEND or LLDD staff member can carry out that detailed assessment. They do not need to be level 8 qualified. They just need to be a professional. So they've got to have the experience and some background in SEND LLDD. They obviously just can't be anybody in your organisation. They've got to have the knowledge and skills to be able to take that forward. And as I said previously, the detailed support needs assessment can now take place at any point in the apprenticeship, enabling support for learners who may have masked during the apprenticeship start process. But as it says in the bottom point there, you can only claim the additional learning support funding from the time that the assessment is made. So it can't be, you can't backdate that claim to the beginning of the apprenticeship, for example. It's got to be from when the support is claimed. Now, someone asked me the other day, you know, if you've been putting in place additional support for that learner because you've recognised there's a need, but now you realise that actually you do need a detailed assessment, can you backdate for that additional support that you've put in place previously? The answer is no, you cannot. You can only do it from the time that there's a detailed assessment and evidence of the detailed assessment. So you've got to have that detailed assessment outcome as your evidence for actually claiming the additional learning support going forward from that point over. And finally, on the additional learning support, previously or in this year, it's always been that those reviews have to take place monthly. From the 1st of August, those support progress reviews can now take place every 3 months. So that reduces your paperwork and your resource use. And it does enable the timed approach. Now, obviously, as you're able to take detailed assessments right the way throughout the year, if you notice masking or learners that are behind and not progressing at the speed, and you've noticed there may be some needs, you're going to still have different start dates. But you can actually do a timed approach to say, well, actually, we've got a new learner. They're going to need a detailed support. So we can actually start doing those progress reviews every 3 months, and we can do them in batches, or you can spread them out. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference, but it does reduce your bureaucracy. And if you're clever with enabling a timed approach to those progress reviews, it should reduce the resource and the work for your teams as well to actually manage that. And as we all know, additional learning support needs, having been so difficult in the past and so bureaucratic for providers to claim, it has in some cases actually put providers off, particularly with that level 8 SEN qualified member of staff. So we know that there are providers out there that haven't claimed additional learning support because it is so bureaucratic and so difficult, and that has resulted in learners leaving their apprenticeship because they're just not getting the support to enable them to feel able to continue on and go forward and achieve. And I think that the ESFA, DFE have put this in place to enable better achievement outcomes and better support for those learners. So additional learning support funding is probably one of the key resources that a provider can claim to add in additional support for specific learners. So hopefully this will make a difference to both the achievement outcomes of the individual learners, but also to your achievement rates inside your provider as well. So I think that's a real bonus for the apprenticeship changes from 1st of August. So there was a new de minimis was introduced earlier on this year for the 1st of August, but it was a 30,000, but now the ESFA has put that back up to 100,000. So if you are a prime provider and you are subcontracting to a subcontracted provider, as long as that subcontracting provider meets the new subcontracting standard, And it says, as long as the subcontractor is on APAR as a main supporting provider, or the provider can use a subcontractor that's not published on APAR if they are delivering less than £100,000 worth of provision. Now, that is across all their subcontractors. So if you've got a subcontractor that is actually working with 2 or 3 prime providers, including yourselves, you need to know exactly how much they are drawing down from the other prime providers to enable you to understand whether they're going to need to be on APAR or not. But if across, their 2, 3 or 4, however many subcontracting contracts they have, it's still drawing down less than 100K's worth of provision, you can use that provider if they're not on APAR. So that's an increase from 30,000 to 100,000, because 30,000 was literally nothing. It made no difference whatsoever. And there are plenty of providers out there that are delivering some really great provision. They're still small providers, but they're delivering really great specialist provision, whether that's in maths or English or anything else, to prime providers, because the prime providers don't have the knowledge or the wherewithal to be able to deliver it themselves. But they're so small that really being on APAR would be almost an impossibility. So the increase to 100,000 before they have to go on APAR is actually, again, a big removal barrier, a big barrier being removed by the DfE. You've got to have written confirmation that you fully achieved the subcontracting standard before you can use subcontractors that are on APAR. So that subcontracting standard meeting is really important. Now, Carl from RSM UK and I did a subcontracting workshop just over a year ago for providers to support you with that subcontracting standard application. If anybody thinks that us rerunning that workshop would be of interest, please do put it in the questions, because he and I, or Lisa and I, have discussed the possibility of rerunning that, because we recognise there are new providers coming into the subcontracting provision. The subcontracting standard has been updated slightly, so if anybody thinks that workshop would be useful, we can run it again. It is a big workshop for us to run, so it would be a paid-for workshop, but we don't really charge very much for those workshops, and we probably run that. We can't run it before the end of term, there's just not time, but we could run it in the autumn for any providers looking to apply for subcontracting standard for next year. So the deadline to submit your subcontracting standard for this year is 31st of July, and then obviously for next year it'll be 31st July 2025. So that's the subcontracting uptick in the de minimis amount for not your subcontracting organisations not being on APAR. So a few other policy changes. Already got the top one there, should have whipped that one out. So DfE reviewed the minimum requirement for active learning. So this is your off-the-job learning. So they're now calling active learning. Now, they have basically said that it had to be every single month. There had to be some active learning taking place. But we know that with certain providers and certain standards, that actually block release or front-loaded delivery works far, far better for both the provider and the individual and for the employer. So that active learning taking place every single month had become a little bit of a problem. So they have now basically said it's absolutely fine if it's agreed with the employer to either front load or a block release model. And for those models, some active learning must take place at least every 3 calendar months of the practical period. So that's the time they're actually on program doing practical learning. So that's a bit of flex, which is really, really helpful. If you're delivering normally, then obviously, off the job or active learning has to take place every month. But for those that front load or block release, that every 3 months is now a feasible option. And as from pretty much 1st of April or from now, large employers that pay the apprenticeship levy can now choose to transfer up to 50% of their levy funds each year to other businesses. So if you have got employers that have got excess levy, but you've got skill shortages in your area, working with those large employers and other smaller employers that might be willing to take on apprentice to fill some of those skills gaps can be beneficial for your whole region. If you're in a mayoral combined authority, many of the mayoral combined authorities are either doing it themselves, as in they've got a collected levy pot, so employers can give their levy to the mayoral combined authority and they will allocate it out to smaller employers and providers that can deliver apprenticeships that are in short supply or skills that are in short supply. So do talk to your mayoral combined authority and they'll be able to point you in the right direction. And for new starts from the 1st of April this year, for employers that do not pay the levy, the government will fund all the apprenticeship training costs up to the funding band maximum for those apprentices aged between 16 to 21, or for those apprentices aged up to 24 who have got an education, health and care plan. So that's for all employers. It's not just for your smaller employers that have got 50 learners or less. So again, that's a slight change in the version 4 of the apprenticeship funding rules for this year, for 23-24, where they've taken out for the ECHP that it must be 50 employees or less. They've just taken out that 50 employees or less, and it now applies to any employer that doesn't pay the levy. So that's, again, another bonus and another barrier removed, which is great. That's it. I think we've got a very small amount of time for some questions. I'm just going to pop out the question box here and see if we've got any questions. Yes, Delia, we will always email out a copy of the slides and also a copy of the recording. Oh, someone's lost sound, tried restarting, but it's still not working. I'm sorry, Helen, everybody else has still got sound. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. If you did lose sound, that's not us, I'm afraid, but we will send out the recording so you can always listen into that. So let's just scroll back up here because we've actually got quite a few questions. I recognise that some of you may have to go soon, so right, here we go. Can I check whether it is mandatory to undertake an assessment on all apprentices? When you say all, Natasha, no, it's just on those apprentices that you think may potentially have an additional learning support need, or that have SEND or an education health and care plan. So realistically, you know, if you think claiming additional support funds to enable you to put in place additional learning support, you know, whether that's a teaching assistant that will help them out, whether it's additional hours on English and maths, whether, you know, it's something like you know, in some cases you might need to potentially buy, you know, a screen that enlarges things. There's all sorts of things that you can purchase with additional learning support funds. If you are going to be putting in place a resource which costs you money as a provider to support that learner, and you're going to use the additional learning support funding, which is up to £150 a month to support that learner, then you have to do that diagnostic assessment, that full diagnostic assessment of additional learning support needs to prove that there are needs, and to be able to prove that you can claim that up to £150 a month. Read English and maths changes for SEND. If a learner has a level 1 in maths but is struggling to achieve a level 2 due to learner need, would this learner be able for the exception? Oh, the thing is, they've already got a level 1. That's a really good question, Janice. I think we're going to go back to the DFE and ask them about that. I would say basically what you're saying there, they've already got level 1 in maths, because that additional English and math change is for SEND learners, and basically they're saying they should take the level 3. Then I'm assuming what they're basically saying is, as long as you've got the evidence to say that they have got additional learning support needs or LLDD or SEND needs, that you wouldn't need to do any more English and maths with them if you think it's going to be really hard or impossible for them to achieve their level 2. But I will check that with DFE and ask them. Say a learner has no documentation to say they have learning needs, but as the provider we strongly suspect there is, what would be considered a suitable evidence to warrant them moving onto an entry 3 course in maths or English? It's that full assessment, Tim. He's left, unfortunately, so he's going to miss me answering this. It has to be a SEND LLDD professional will know that there is a full sort of diagnostic assessment that will be taken to spot additional learning support needs. I'm not a specialist in that area, but a SEND or LLDD professional will understand that there is that assessment. You've got to have taken that and done that full. It's not a diagnostic assessment as you would take for English and maths. It's an LLDD SEND assessment. They've got to take that full comprehensive assessment before you can move them onto the entry level 3. And the previous slide on English and maths, can the functional skills requirement be reviewed, or all current apprentices, or just for new starts? It's basically, it's your current apprentices as well, Gina, because it does say in the funding rules it's for current apprentices, but you can only put that in place from the 1st of August. So if you've got current apprentices that are continuing on into 24, 25, and you've got real functional skills problems with them and challenges, from 1st of August, I mean, you can put them on hold now realistically, and then from the 1st of August you can then slide them into that that entry 3 if you think they're really struggling to do the level 1 or the level 2 now. If it was me, that's what I'd do. We're putting them on hold and saying, look, they're just not making it. So we can actually, they're continuing on into 24, 25 on their apprenticeship. So let's put them on hold, and then we can do an assessment and we can change their functional skills needs if we recognise there's definitely a need. We'd be really interested in a subcontracting standard session very shortly, looking to apply for subcontract. Okay, Rob, I'll take subcontract. Yeah, okay, so that's 2 for the subcontracting standard workshop. Someone saying you have to leave. Copy of the slides. Yes. Hi, can I double check if the new maths and English rules apply to all apps or just LLDD learners? It's to LLDD learners, Bethany, and anybody or any apprentice that you think might have additional learning support needs, and that is actually stopping them from progressing, or it's slowing their progress so much that you've got real concerns about them completing or achieving. So as tutors, you will have staff that will be looking at some of their apprentices potentially and saying, I think we might have issues there with this particular apprentice. I think they might have master learning need. There's plenty of apprentices out there that are older. I've only just myself been identified as being neurodivergent. So there are plenty of apprentices out there that are older that might have additional learning needs that might be neurodivergent in some shape or form, and it's actually slowing their progress. You can now double check them and take out a full comprehensive diagnostic on their additional learning support needs. If that diagnostic identifies that they do have additional needs, you could then apply those English and maths rules to them. But obviously it would have to be for continuing learners if they're a current apprentice into 24-25 or any new starts from the 1st of August. I had a company trying to sell a product saying we had to assess all apprentices. No, that's not true, Natasha. It's only if you think that they've got those additional, it's by exception. As the DFE said, this is by exception. It's only for those apprentices that you think you've spotted that might have masked needs or have not been identified as LLDD, but actually you think that they are. Can't be for all apprentices. So do not let any outside organisation say that you have to carry out those diagnostic assessments for everybody, because you don't, but also you do not get funding for that full comprehensive diagnostic assessment of LLDD. You're carrying it out on your own time, your own resources. Then you can claim the £150 if they do. So any company that's coming to you saying that actually you need to do all your apprentices, that's not the case, and it's going to have a cost implication for you there. So yeah, be careful. With the apprenticeship 5%, it's not strictly employers who don't pay the levy, it's employers who have a non-levy account. Levy account holders who haven't paid the levy in a long time still have to pay the 5% when they fall into insufficient funds. Contact ESFA if you have any like that who you think deserve not to pay the 5%. Thanks, Ruth. We'll double check that. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I always thought it was employers that don't pay the levy that can access that. It's basically the smaller employers that fall underneath that £3 million payroll threshold that have access to that, not non-levy payers. That's what I'm pretty sure the ruling is. Does the upskilling still apply? Gina, I'm not quite sure what that means. Does the upskilling still apply if no ALS? No. So if you do a full diagnostic assessment and you don't identify an additional learning support, then no, you've really got no evidence to back your need to claim additional learning support for that particular learner. So yeah, it's regarding additional learning support, if the cost per month is less than 100, you can still claim, but you can only claim the amount that you are putting in place. You cannot claim the full 150 if you're only, say, using 70 or 80 pounds worth of resource per month. You've got to claim for the amount that you're actually delivering. It's been suggested that paragraph 45 of the new funding rules, which wasn't in the draft version, indicates the new flexibility is only for associated with requirements specified. Oh, crikey. I haven't got the paragraphs open in front of me at the moment. So where level 2 English and Maths is not a stated requirement or a level 2 apprenticeship, there isn't any reference to level 3 apprenticeships in paragraph 36. So does this mean that the flexibility is not applicable if level 2 English and Maths is a stated requirement for a standard? Robin, that is a very, very good question. Hi, Robin. We will find out, and we'll cover it in the webinar in September, because we'll do another webinar in September, including the updates. So watch out for that one. For ASF, Adult Skills Fund, DFE have confirmed that their flowcharts are currently incorrect and they will be updated close to 1st of September. I asked whether a course category on file is not free courses for jobs or full level 3 legal entitlement, would the learner have to apply for an advanced learner loan full cost? They replied that this is correct. There has been quite a lot of confusion via JISC about issues with interpretation of funding thresholds and when it applies. I can imagine, Delia. As I say, we're going to do another webinar in early September once we've got any additional news and information from ESFA. What I do know is that obviously the general election was a bit of a surprise to quite a lot of people, particularly staff inside DFE in the ESFA. So they haven't had much time to do what they would normally do at these times of year, because they've been running around supporting that change. So we are expecting quite a lot of information to come out post the election, because obviously PERDA will have finished and ESFA will be able to publish new rules. Obviously they'll have to have sign off by any new Secretary of State if there is one, but we assume that by early September we may have some news. It may be later on in September, because obviously with the general election things might change, but as soon as we've got new news or new rules or any changes to rules, we will run another webinar for you, hopefully sometime in September. Currently they have to upskill from level 1 to level 2, even if they're on level 2 apprenticeship where time allows. You're welcome, Robin. Yes, they do, Gina. But obviously, if they've got that additional learning support that you've identified via a full comprehensive assessment, then you would say if they've got a level 1, then they don't need to upskill to level 2. If you've identified they've got those learning support needs, LLDD or SEND, even if they've not got the ECHP. Hopefully that answers all your questions. There are some there that we can't answer because obviously we're still waiting on clarification, which the ESFA can't publish at the moment because of that PERDA. But thank you for joining us, everybody. I hope that was useful. And yes, have a great summer. We will see you at some point in September. Watch out for our webinars, which we'll be advertising on both LinkedIn, and we'll send out flyers via our email updates funding contact list if you've signed up for it. And enjoy the break, those of you that are able to have a break. Thank you.